So can you give me a name of a consulting company like Accenture? Is that what they have here? Let's say example you work for Accenture. I'm not too sure what JP Morgan do. I know they're a bank, but let's say example you go work for Accenture. What's going to happen is they will hire you. They will hire. Let's say example they will hire a bunch of software engineers. Be at your level, then they'll have like a technical lead, and maybe somebody in the middle to kind of manage all that. But basically, you're going to be doing software engineering. It's the same thing, no difference. The only thing is, right, is that, in my opinion, if you're going to be consulting, then you're expected to know your stuff. Because customers are paying, I don't know what they're paying, like £250, £150 an hour. So they expect results. So that's the difference between consulting. So if you move into a consulting role, then they will, if you go in as a graduate, they will educate you and they'll bring you up to speed, and then you'll be given time to kind of learn the ropes. Obviously, a level that's higher, they're paying you a little bit more. They expect you to know your stuff, but that's nothing to worry about. At the end of the day, basically, is just when it comes to software engineering, always be one, two, 3 steps ahead. All right. If you are, I'll give an example. Right. If you're software engineering, I'll give an example. Right. Okay. So if you want to get paid the most money, you do not do the old stuff. Right, they don't pay you for doing the old stuff. If you want to get paid the most money you can get, what you have to do is you have to be savvy. It's like a little bit the gambling side. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, looking across the river, right? You've got stepping stones there, and they go different ways. What you have to do if you want to be savvy in IT is predict. You have to be almost like predict the future. You have to see where's the market going. So look at blogs, look at news. Look at where the market's going. So, for example, things like machine learning, artificial intelligence. Kind of 3 things, and big data analytics is a big thing there. Sorry? Yeah, it's blockchain. So basically, what you want to do, right, is you always want to keep your skills up to date.
Let me take you back to many years ago, Stefan. If you recall, I used to work in a company in Edinburgh. I used to work for a company called Edinburgh Computer Consultants at the time, and Stefan was also a consultant at the time. And the technologies I was working in, I don't think you had insight into those technologies.
Yeah.
The things that we take for granted nowadays, object-oriented programming, object-oriented design. If you recall object-oriented programming, I can't remember it, but this guy says I introduced him to it and showed him some examples. So this is about staying on top of what's coming.
Yeah, so we both working in Edinburgh, and I was working for the company friends I was working in my company. I went to see him, and then he was talking to me about how, he introduced me to a lot of the object-oriented fundamentals. I took those ideas and then started applying them to, I was developing a CRM system. You know what a CRM system is? Yeah, so I think the customer had an internal CRM system that was web-based. It was ASP at the time with a database backend, and I think I was using some middle-tier components. A bit old school a little bit, but basically, yeah. So the point I was trying to make is always look ahead. If you are doing stuff that is out of date, the only person you can blame is yourself. And the thing that's going to happen is you've got to be. I know it's kind of challenging in Scotland. The market's a little bit smaller, but the world's your oyster. You know what I mean? Basically, I went to the US. The world's your oyster. Got skill, learn the real skills. Scotland has some that you might not. I'm not sure whether you're aware of it, but Scotland has world-class education. Now I work for AWS, right, and I meet people all throughout the world. And one thing I always realise is that I got a world-class education.
World-class educators like me are here, that's why.
So you guys are getting a world-class education, so the world's your oyster. You can go in, just get your skills up, get yourself skills solid. The thing with IT is always refresh your skills, always don't stagnate. If you're stagnating, then your IT's not a place to stagnate. If you really want to make good money, I'm sure everybody here wants to make good money, then you got to stagnate, and you can't afford to stagnate. Companies want to hire people who bring fresh ideas to the table, who basically kind of say, I've done this, I've done that. They want to see people that are inventive, that add value. Because one of the things, I'll give you an example, right, is a lot of companies. What I do myself, right, with companies is I help them modernize their legacy applications. You know what I mean? And one of the things that I've been exposed to is a lot of companies. You've heard of 3M, yeah? You guys be Scottish State. So I went to see 3M over in Maryland. That's, what they think was they wanted a sandbox for the software developers, the software engineers. Let me explain. You know what a sandbox is, yeah? What a sandbox does is this, it's like a separated environment that you can go in there and play with ideas. You can create stuff. You can be inventive. Because basically, what happens is companies who are inventive and give like users, you know what I mean? If you're a user and you're on an iPhone, let's say for example I'm on a phone, right? I'm using, you know, Virgin Money app, and I'm on another app, and I'm using Bank of Scotland app, and this app gives me a lot more features, a lot more capabilities, a lot more things to do, and I'm on another app and it doesn't have those features. You know, you're going to switch over to the bank or use the bank more, gives you more features. So you guys are the inventors. You guys have to. Companies want to. Hopefully, companies will give you the ability to be inventive. They give you sandboxes to work in, because basically, a lot of stuff that we do with customers is sometimes their priorities are different. A lot of companies are looking to save money. So one of the things I do is that my customers are looking to save money on Windows licensing. So if you are using, like, say, for example, Windows operating system, or using SQL Server, a SQL Server has a very expensive license cost, right? A lot of companies are moving away from like Windows license-based software to like license-free. So you guys here have heard of Postgres? Yeah. So Postgres is a license-free database system, right? It's kind of like it's like SQL Server, but it doesn't have. You can run it on Linux. You know what I mean? So I can help companies, you know, move away from that stuff. But the point I kept trying to get to the point I was trying to make. Yeah, so every company is different. Some companies want to save money. Some companies want to, you know, give their software engineers a sandbox to work in, so people like yourself can be inventive. You know, the key thing is basically you always, you know, don't let yourself stagnate. Always keep looking at what's happening on the internet. You know, what's happening, what's the latest thing. You know, but then basically you've got to not always be like what's happening tomorrow, but you've always got to be happening 2 days ahead. You know, where is the market going? You know what I mean? You've got to kind of keep skills. So the other thing is, I'm sure you told this, is that you have to keep your skills up to date. You know what I mean? What's going to happen is you have to show, you know, basically, if you want to make the big money, if you want to make good money, you kind of want to look at, companies want to hire the most, you know, folks that are inventive, that come with most of the skills, you know what I mean? You know, so that's kind of, always keep your skills up to date, you know?
What AWS now, what interesting projects have you been working on recently, or what trends have you noticed in starting from the cloud computing as it's starting to become more?
Okay.
Everybody's starting to adopt it, everyone's starting to use it much more than before.
Yeah.
What trend have you noticed that you started to go that should have something to do with the future?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that AWS is a big company, they get their fingers into everything, you know? But I'll give you the background. So I started AWS 7 years ago, right? When I started AWS, I was a consultant. I was working for what's called the professional services. So I was kind of like a consultant where I'd go to a customer site and they would basically say, this is a project, we want you to complete this task. So they bring in like software engineers and architects and solution architects and whatnot, and then you basically, they would have a contract to say, you know what, this is basically what you're in for. When we first started AWS was kind of like a backup, a disaster recovery location. Are you guys familiar with disaster recovery, yeah? Disaster recovery basically, so let me ask you guys a question, right? What's the difference between failover and disaster recovery?
Disaster recovery, really, implementation fails.
Yeah, like say for example, like your servers go down, you kind of basically say, okay, well I've got servers in this building, if the power goes out to that building, then you know that. And what's failover? There's a failover is kind of like, you know, so disaster recovery is the most extreme situation, right? For example, you know, the whole of Glasgow, the power goes out the whole of Glasgow, then they can move, you know, within a short time, they can basically move to. Okay, so I don't know if I can delete that, but yeah, so basically the difference between disaster recovery, have you guys heard the term RTO and RPO? So what happens is, this is a kind of a thing that, you know, the customers want to do, right, is a recovery time objective and recovery point objective. What happens, right, is basically if you are, I'll come back to your question, but let's say for example, if you are basically, if a customer is moving to the cloud, or no, let me see explain this, right? Yeah, when I first started AWS, right, customers were using AWS as a disaster recovery place. So the primary source of truth was their original data center. You know what I mean? Because you guys know that most, I'm not sure who, if you're not using the cloud, you're probably sitting in a data center somewhere. Or worst case scenario, you know, you've got a server room in the building.
What do the banks use then? So the banks, are they
They
using
use data
cloud
centers.
services, or are they their own data centers?
No, they buy data centers, so I can't really talk about, it's probably the same in the UK, but they buy data centers, right? So for example, they'll have data centers, it's almost like, so a data center is basically a big massive building with thousands of servers in it, and you rent a handful of servers there, or how many servers you need, based on what spec you need, you'll rent them, right?
Would you still call that on-premise?
That's called on-premise.
Would you still be called that,
Yeah,
even though
yeah.
it's away from the building?
Yeah, because it's not in the cloud. If it's not in the cloud, it's on-premise.
Okay.
Alright. So basically, what we were finding was a lot of customers were in the data center they were old school thinking, right? So they said, this is 7 years ago, old school was you're on-prem in our own data center, we're paying rent to Asmit Corporation, right? We rent the service from them. And then what happens is, what we'll do is we'll have a little backup of the same servers, the applications and the databases in the cloud for disaster recovery, okay? And what happens is, if our data center you're renting from Asmit Corporation goes down, then what we can do is, either we can have an automatic switch that will, you know, repoint the web servers or repoint the database, whatever it is, to the cloud. All right. And what happens there is basically, you guys should. This is something that you should maybe. I don't know whether you need to study this, but RTOs and RPO.
That's it.
They're what about RTO and RPOs, right? These two things that I ask my customers all the time. Okay, what is your recovery time objective and recovery point objective? The difference is basically if your servers go down, right? Let's say, for example, you're in a data center. How much time are you willing to wait before the disaster recovery one comes up? You know what I mean? Some might say 2-3 hours. Some might say 6 hours. All right. So that's one thing. The other thing is basically is I think the recovery point objective is how much data are you willing to lose if a machine goes. So they could come back and say, you know, we're willing to lose about 1 minute of data. You know what I mean? So basically that comes into that failover thing where you're basically backing up data. And then if this system goes down, there might be a point in time where, like say, for example, you're hitting Ticketmaster with the orders, right? And Ticketmaster goes down, and all these people that have put their orders in, they could be like about 1 minute or 2-3 minutes of data get lost. And that is the critical stuff that people can, both of these are critical, but one is disaster recovery, and then basically one is kind of more failover, you know. And but basically, coming back to your point there, is basically when I first started 7 years ago, customers were looking to use AWS as a failover place. Now, and as a consultant, we were kind of going around begging bowls, asking customers to move to the cloud. And about 1 year, about 6 months after I joined, there's a huge bank called Capital One. Has anybody heard of Capital One? So Capital One, after I joined, about around the time I joined, said that we are going all in on AWS. We're going all in on the cloud. So basically what that meant was that they're going to shut down all the data centers. They had about 5 or 6 data centers throughout the whole of the US. They had a goal of being out of all the data centers within 2 years. That sounds like a long time, but it does take a lot of time to move stuff. So really what they want to do was they wanted to do what's called lift and shift is a term that's called lift and shift. What lift and shift does, right, is you'll basically, it sounds like this is on-prem, right, this is the cloud. What you'll basically do is you'll basically take the application, the database as is, and you just transfer it to AWS. You won't change anything around it on how it operates. You know what I mean? It'll be exactly the same. Alright. So what happens there basically is if you're living in the cloud, right? So does anybody here know why people move to the cloud?
Always available.
Always available, what else?
Scale's better.
Hmm?
It's more easy to scale.
Exactly, yeah. What else?
They're a little more responsible for maintaining the servers.
Yeah, so if you're on-prem, you have to maintain the servers. If you're in the cloud, these are called self-managed. They're managed by AWS. So if you think about it right, if you are a software developer, right, you only, if you're like, you're responsible for software development, or you're a software development lead, or you work for Capital One or Bank of Scotland, then all you need to worry about is writing the best applications. You don't have to really hire anyone to sit and manage the databases. You don't have to hire anyone to look at the hard disk is run out of space. You don't have to hire someone to make sure that's all failover. So what happens is they're called managed services. You know, they're managed services are what you get from the cloud, and that's basically what I do is kind of move customers in that direction. So coming back to what I was saying was that when you do a lift and shift, you're taking whatever existed in your data center or on premise, and you don't change it because it takes a lot of time to restructure and re-architect solutions to work in the cloud. You know what I mean? So you just do a lift and shift, and these applications, right, are not optimized to work in the cloud. They still work in the old school way, and a lot of people we talk to, they still think old school. You know what I mean?
Our education system then is still teaching old school. There's a big revamp of this working in the cloud in the education sector.
Alright.
See, right now, you're probably all being used to, well, take this unit for example, web server management. You've been taught web service, how a web server runs, how to install application on a web server.
Mm-hmm.
What does the industry do nowadays? Do they still have
Yeah, well,
IIS set up and so on?
Well, yeah, the IIS has been, so what happens is basically IIS is, you know, IIS is kind of a little bit going out now, it's kind of deprecated. A lot of customers are using, I can't remember the name, I need to Google it, but you know, as customers move to Linux, they're using equivalents to
Nginx.
Sorry?
There's one Nginx.
Nginx, that's kind of, Nginx is kind of like what Nginx does is kind of a path routing system, right? You know what I mean? If you type in a URL, let's say it was the three of you, right, are going on to like Ticketmaster, and you guys have separate accounts, right? You're basically, you know, you're all going to be using the same web server. What Nginx does is it does path routing. So it'll separate you three of you out. That's called multi-tenancy, right? So the three of you are using the one server, the web server, but you're separated out based on path routing and that kind of thing. But so that's basically it. But IIS is kind of I used to do that like 10 years, 20 years ago. But basically, you know, as you guys start to, you know, figure out what's going on in AWS, we can do that. But come back to what point I was trying to make, right? Is companies are moving to AWS, the cloud. All their software systems that were written 10, 15 years ago are not what's called cloud friendly. You know, they're still, they still have to be managed, the servers still have to be managed, they still have to be maintained, they're still old school. So what's happening is, what customers tend to do when they move to AWS, first thing they do after doing a lift and shift is they do what's called optimization. So they might do some tweaking of the application to make it run a little bit better. You know what I mean? They might.
So I'm thinking, when they go out into the industry, will they be tasked with doing stuff that you're saying, taking these old applications and then making them cloud ready or switching them? Or
Yeah, they could do. Yeah, yeah.
So
Could happen.
Is it a big thing that companies are moving towards?
Yeah, all companies I do do that. You know, I mean, there's lots of things going on in AWS. I'm actually fixing all the. You know, I did all this stuff 20 years ago, and a lot of applications I've helped customers modernize.
Or similar to those ones that you worked on way back then?
Yeah,
So
they're
lots of
like,
these
you know,
out there.
MVP applications, .NET applications.
Yeah.
And what's happening is customers are starting to look at managed services. So have you guys heard the term, you know what containers are, yeah? So you know what the difference between a container and a regular machine?
Another snapshot, and you can carry basically in for an application elsewhere. You can amend it later.
Yeah. No, basically what it is, right, is let's say, for example, you're a software developer, right, and you wrote some web application or web page on your machine, all right, you got it all working and you debugged it and it's working beautiful, right, and then you hand it to him over there and you say, okay, I've checked it in. What do you guys use for code? Do you guys do code checking and like source control and stuff? Okay, so what's going to happen is, you know, he's going to. Sorry? Yeah, so GitHub is like a repository for holding your software, right? And that's pretty common in the industry that people use GitHub. So if he writes an application, right, to do something right, he'll check in his code, and then you'll pull it from there, right, and then you'll install it in your own local machine because you have to write another piece of it. So you're dependent on him for your part. And what's going to happen is you'll then basically, before you'll change the code, you'll take his code and run it. You know what I mean? Say, for example, back in the day, we had something called a test harness. It could be just like a free page. You type in a value, press a button, and you're expecting the response. So the first thing you do before you change any code, always, make sure it works before you change anything, because otherwise you're dealing with two problems. So you check his code in, you check, you download it, you check it out, and you run it, and it doesn't work. You get an error, 404 error, whatever it is, on your web page, right? And you call them up and say, you know what, it's not working. You checked it in and it's not working. The first thing he's going to say, worked on my machine. All right. And that's what I used to say back in the day, it works on my machine. That's your problem if it doesn't work on your machine. Which technically he could have something on his machine that is unique to his installation. He could have third-party software installed. He could have some settings that he doesn't aware of that's unique to his machine that makes it work on his but doesn't work on yours. With a container, what that does, right, is it takes the level down. So if you've got like a server, right, you've got these layers, right, okay, and then you've got OS. Say for example, about here, that's the OS, right, and then you can have the application here, okay. All right, and then there's basically, I'm not really, it's been a while since I studied it. What happens there is, historically, what happened was not with containers, but the old school where you checked your code in, you just checked in your, say, example, the C# code. Is that you guys do C#?
Yeah.
You do the C# code, you maybe you've got data access layer. Yeah. The data access layer. What do you guys use for data access layer? Is it entity framework or? Okay, so that's your entity framework, and that's so this guy over here, right? He wrote an application. He wrote a couple of pages, right? Okay, and then he updated the data access layer. All right, and then he takes that code, he takes it into GitHub, right? Okay, and then you over there, you take that code, you put it on the machine, right? Okay, you run it, does it work? So then you get this back and forth, you know what I mean? It's like it's working on my machine, blah 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 blah. What happens there basically with a container? Is it this here? How do you erase it? Yeah.
You pick that to erase, I'm free to erase.
That's it there.
So that's a full screen erase.
I'll go with that.
That one is just a little bit of an erase.
Oh, right, yes.
That's a big erase.
Okay.
And these are colours.
Alright, okay, so I'm going to do a low erase, is that right?
Yeah, little erase and a big erase.
Okay. What's happening here, right, is with a container. I did get the container, right? You get the app plus a little bit of the OS as well. So the OS is split up into a few layers, right? But what happens here is you take a bit of the OS as well along. This container, this whole thing here is what's called a container. So what happens is this part here, the lower part of the OS, that's closer to the heart, the actual hardware, the heart of the actual processor, is common. So what's going to happen is he'll basically, both of you will be running this container operating like Docker. You had a Docker?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll have Docker installed on your machine, right? Both of you. What's going to happen is he's going to take this code plus, and he's going to get a container. He's going to get a Docker container, right? And he's going to install his application on that Docker container. And he's going to basically say, okay, this is the version of Docker I'm using. You know what I mean? And it could be a Linux. You can get either Linux or Windows Dockers. But the Windows Dockers are very heavy. They're big fat. They're basically running to gigs. So you don't really, if you can avoid going down the Windows containers path, you avoid it because they're a little bit behind the curve. Linux is what's way to go. Anyway, what will happen here is you'll take that container, right, and you'll check it into what's called a container registry. You guys, so it's kind of like GitHub, but it's a container. It's a registry for containers. You'll then basically take that container, and it's what these are basically called these are called layers in the container. So this is called the base layer, which is basically the layer, and then there'll be layers on top. And what happens with the containers that it'll basically do a lot of the hard work for you. He'll basically have had installed a bunch of different things in order to get his application to work, and it's called the Docker file. The Docker file kind of tells you what's in there. But then what happens is you'll basically take that container, install it in your machine, and it should work fine. There's no running on my machine because operating system's coming with the machine, coming with the container. All right. Now what's happening there? Basically, what I do is, in terms of what customers are doing is they're moving away. So from what is called monolithic applications. So you've heard the term monolithic applications. So back in the day, right, like 20 years ago or 10, 15 years ago, there's a lot of collateral out there that was written 10, 15 years ago. So application, software companies have been spending years maintaining, you know what I mean? And basically, they're called monolithic applications. What that means, right, is, let's say, for example, you have an application that is,
The MVC projects that you guys are working on are probably that monolithic one system, SQL Server, massive code base. SQL's the database code. You don't separate that, do you? Do you have a separate layer for the data access?
We use Entity to kind of make the tables and stuff and
Separate it out.
It's kind of naturally split off, so a lot of the front end stuff is also HTML and things like that, and everyone on the back end stuff split up into say
Okay.
shell. There's only like a handful of things that like link them together, especially commands and stuff.
So the monolithics are going towards the web services, APIs and microservices, is that?
Yeah, no, so what's happening with monolithic applications? Let's just say, example, this is your monolithic application, right? Okay? This is UI, right? This is middle tier. Yeah, you guys see this all the time, haven't you? Familiar with it straight up. So you've got your UI, you get the middle tier, and then so basically what happens, let's say, example, these are two modules, right? The accounting module and inventory module, right? And you've got the middle tier, which is basically a module that services maybe other other module, inventory module, you've got accounting module, you've got, admin module, whatever it is, right? This is sitting in the middle tier, and then you've got a database that's using the entity framework to kind of talk to all this, right? Okay, so that's a monolith application, right? So what happens, like, basically, let's just say, for example, this guy here, right? This guy here is, what would you say is the most, if you have an application, right, let's just say, for example, a pet shop application, right? What do you guys usually use as an example? Okay, let's just say a bookstore, right? What if you have a bookstore, right, that sells books, you can just browse books. Let's take Amazon for example, right? Would you say there was a capability or a function or an offering in Amazon Web Services that is used more than others, like booking or searching or whatever? What would you say that was? Search. People more searching more than they're buying, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just say, for example, this is Amazon Web Services, old school, right? Is Amazon Web Services, the actual web page, not Amazon Web Services, the Amazon website about 10 years ago was monolithic, right? And then they moved to microservices about 10 years ago. You know what I mean? And if you open up the Amazon web page, what you're actually seeing is, have you guys studied Ajax, or, they kind of, you have separate parts of the web page loading different points?
Different points now.
You have done that?
Touched on it a wee bit in Dan's class,
Is Ajax you guys use?
a wee tiny bit, but not much.
Okay.
So synchronous kind of JavaScript.
So let's example, this is the Amazon web page, right? There might be a page, there might be a part of the page that's over here, and there's a part of the page over here, and there's another part of the page, right? Okay, you understand? So this, you're looking at the browser here, right? And then this might be a list of all the stuff that you found. This might be the, this might be your dollar amount, or this might be like, the count of, but every, what happens, different parts of the page refresh at different rates. Back in the old day, yeah, it's called a one-page application. You have it, term?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what happens is these parts here refresh at different rates. And what happened was in Amazon back in the day, this would be one page, and then the whole page would refresh and reload, and they wouldn't be like separated out. But basically, if you think about it right, these are kind of, what's happened now is, as companies are moving away from microservices, moving away from monolith applications, then they're moving to microservices. But come back to my point I was saying before was, if there's a part of the application, right, at least is more in demand, right, you need to scale it, don't you? So, in old school, if this was a monolithic application, right, okay, and let's say, for example, you know that this one here needs to scale more based on demand. You know what I mean?
If that's a search partner, and I need that to service more clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got all these people coming in, right? All these people coming in. You know what I mean? All these hits on the web page on the front end, and most of them, like say, example, they go into module 2 on the UI, page 2, and most of them will go to 4. What's going to happen is this module cannot scale independent of the rest of it. You know what I mean? It is basically limited, it's kind of sitting in the same bucket. So if you want it to basically, so if you want to make, what I mean by scale, right, is that, let's say there's an example, if I was to take, if I want to take this out, right, okay, and I put it on a separate little box, okay, let's say for example, this is on one server, I keep this out, right, and I now basically put 4 in a place where it can scale. So if I can basically, what happens is by separating it out, I can then have, I can have 10 of them service much more customers. All right. And then what happens here, then that maybe is call back in to 5. So what you're doing is, this is called breaking the monolith. That's what we do with customers. Customers now, right, have a lot of monolithic applications that don't scale. They can't meet the demand of parts of it, you know what I mean? So what they do basically is, if you want to have if you have a monolithic application, you want to meet the demands of, like say for example, there's a customer called apartment.com, right, that, this is a long time ago, but they were going to be advertising during the Super Bowl, right, and what they did basically, they provisioned additional machines, they provisioned additional machines for a short time, that's why I went to the cloud. But the idea really is that if you want to scale the application, you have to scale the entire whole thing up. So you might need 100 of these, but you still only need 4 of these and 5 of them. But you still got to do 100 of all these. If this is all sitting in the one monolithic application, you're paying for all that extra hardware.
You're not using.
Is it kind of similar to components working React Native, where each component separate, but then you can use it all together later on and make calls to it after the fact?
It's a little bit different because I don't think, is that scaling? Does that actually say, you know what, for React I need 10 more of these in case I need more?
Similar, but it's more like that, the kind of idea of splitting things up and then using them.
It's kind of similar to that, but this is.
At the back end of what you're saying, Oliver, the
Yeah.
back end would have to scale.
Right, okay.
So React front end containers are connecting to some API.
Yeah.
That API might be that number 4 that has to scale.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen, right, is this is going to stay on your virtual machine, your old computer, right, your old operating system. What's going to happen is this here is going to get moved to container. You see? This is a nice small little piece of code. What you're going to do is you're going to make some adjustments in this code, and so that you can call out to 4. You know what I mean? And this is going to get moved to container. And that's called microservices. This is called, and what is this called? This is what I do for my job, is breaking the monolith. You know what I mean? So what you start doing is you start to break pieces out, put them in a container, so then basically they can scale. So when you start putting these in a container, it can scale. And not only that, it will scale automatically. What will happen is you can monitor memory, CPU, and IOPS on that container to either up.
That will move by itself. In fact, that's the space you've got.
Oh, that's basically got.
Yeah, that's the
Okay, so what's going to happen is this will go down or up scale. It'll increase the number of search modules based on the load. So it'll look at the memory on the machine. If the memory goes above, say, example, you say, okay, well, if the memory goes above 75%, then I want additional microservices to run up. If IOPS it goes up a certain amount, I need more. So what happens is with Docker and containers and that, it gives you a lot more of that kind of flexibility, you know. So what's happening? That's what I do with my job. Is I help companies move in that direction. So what I do basically is we kind of educate customers. We pick a wee project, we'll pick a wee part of the application, and we'll educate them on how to move that. Because a lot of customers are moving in that direction, but they want.
This is what you're saying there, and this is telling me, if I was sitting in your situation right now, guys, I would be thinking, I need to learn this stuff, because I could potentially be doubling my salary if I knew this as a developer.
Say you're saying with the customer, do they come to you with a simple part of the application? Do they want you to scale up, or do they give you the application and you suggest, or maybe you should scale that up?
Yeah, so what they do basically is it's not about scaling, it's more about making it cloud friendly.
Right, okay.
You know what I mean? So what we do basically is a customer might come to us and say, you know what, we basically, we have this application that's, what I do specifically, my job is we give customers What we look at is, we look at customers that are spending close to $1 million to $1.5 million on Windows, right? And what we do is we give them $250,000 to $300,000 in free consulting money, right? So what happens there basically is, it's better to teach someone how to fish and give them a fish. So what we do basically is we'll say, okay, we'll give you $300,000 in consulting time. That's about 3 months, 2-3 months, and we'll give them 4 consultants, and I'll kind of help out with that as well. But what I do initially is a customer will come to me, right, and say, you know what, we want to learn about microservices. We want to learn about, you know, how to use more of the managed services in AWS. But you know, it's a big leap of, you know, it's a big thing for all these folks, right? Because it's a big learning curve. You know what I mean? And another thing that's very interesting is, a lot of the time, one of the reasons why customers come to us is because they want to hold on to people with the skills, or they want to keep people. Now, what you'll find, right, and this has come back to my point earlier, is that companies are having trouble retaining good people. You know what I mean? This come back to my point earlier. If you're working for a customer company that is not giving you an opportunity to learn the latest technology or work with the latest technology, and you're doing old school stuff, you'll stagnate. The company doesn't have a forward thinking mindset, and people will leave. The people that are smart know that I'm invested in my career and my future, and you'll leave the company. And what happens is, employers are starting to not only modernize their applications because they want to get more revenue coming in, but they also are having trouble retaining or employing people like yourselves. Because what's going to happen is, as you guys start getting skilled up and savvy, you're going to phone up, you're going to be applying for jobs, and you're going to ask them, are you guys doing the cloud? Are you guys doing machine learning? If you guys apply yourselves, learn the best skills, you could be driving a Porsche, you can have a nice big house, wherever you guys want, the balls your oyster. But you have to be savvy on what you're doing. You have to know the market, where the market's going. You know what I mean? And that's basically people. So people want to hold on to the skills. So this is basically the other reason why people want to modernize. They want to get, because they're having trouble either hiring folks like yourselves or keeping them in. You know what I mean? And the thing is, the matter is that people look at salaries. For example, give an example. If you learn AWS, or you learn machine learning, whatever it is, if you guys are savvy and look at the way the market's going, then you can command a higher salary. You know what I mean?
One of my friends has just got AWS certified.
Yeah.
He told me that he's paid jump quite a significant amount once he got it.
Yeah. And then if you get a job at AWS or one of those companies, then your salary increases more. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question there, just to make sure I was understanding the concept about breaking the whole monolithic thing.
Yeah.
So essentially, like, just as an example, with like ASP.NET, you have your controllers. If you were to like take one of those and just run it on a separate machine,
Yeah.
then you could be able to like scale that machine up, like add more to it or whatever. It's essentially like that, but on a cloud kind of level.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. You're getting the granularity you're talking about is very fine, but yeah, you can do that. I mean, you're talking about model view controller, yeah.
Yeah. So like, say like you had like a.
But the controller still serves. Yeah. I mean, the controller still services the front end, but if there's business logic.
Yeah.
So the business logic that's in the middle tier, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It does all the data, pulls the
Yeah,
data out.
so they can stuff access to the database and stuff like that. So kind of like that, but just you strip out the front end stuff.
No, you don't strip out the front end stuff. The front end stuff's still there.
No.
But basically, what's going to happen is you need to be able to service more people, or you need to make it easier for you to deploy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that middle tier, there's, you guys write the front end, but then there's stuff that's going on. Maybe somebody has to write a business unit, business logic module that has to do with maybe processing or bank transactions or whatever. Then that person needs to, that needs to be high throughput. It needs to be, that needs to scale, because you want to make sure that if there's a demand, an increased demand on your machines, if there's increased demand from customers, the last thing you want is a customer waiting more than a few seconds. That kills your business. You know what I mean? So you have to make sure that, and that's another thing with the reason why people go to the cloud is, so let me, okay. Okay, so let me explain something else, right, is that if you are, let's say for example, you're a startup, right, okay? And what you'll do basically is you'll buy some this is basically hardware, okay? Okay, this is, I think this is the hardware, this is time, right? Okay, this is hopefully I get it right, but not on this diagram for a while, right? But this is time, right, and this is hardware, and scale, alright. This is hardware. What's going to happen? Let's say you're a startup, right? And you buy a few computers, right? This is old school model, right? You buy, say, example, 5 servers, right? Okay? Okay? And then what happens basically is the business picks up, right? You buy another 50, right? On the hope, you anticipate, but the old school was, right, you'd buy servers, right? You'd put them in your data center or wherever it was, and then basically, you'd ramp up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So then what would happen is there was a lot of over provisioning of machines, because you could never predict the market was going, but you could never want to have less machines than you need. So what would happen in the old days, right? Is the concept of capital and it's a concept. Sorry.
There was an example of a company that would use that would be 5 machines then switching.
All right. So is there any new company that started up? I'm just trying to think of a new company that started up recently. Let's just take Tesla for example, right? I mean, they'll be making cars. They've been making cars for like 5 years now. Okay, so let's say it was Tesla first started up, right? Teslas are all online, they're all connected and stuff. Okay, so let's just say example they started off with 5K servers, right? To service all their machines. And then Tesla took off like crazy, right? So there's a lot more demand. So then what they probably did was let's just say example they provisioned about 50 servers, because they've got all these cars driving around that need to connect to their machines, need to connect to the server, all these Teslas are connected now.
Yeah.
So what would happen is you provision a whole bunch more machines, but then you'd have all this spare capacity because you could never tell how many you're going to sell. Now the AWS is, you don't buy hardware, you just buy it as you need it, you know that, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you need 5 tomorrow, you'll buy 5, and then if you need 0, you can buy. So that was the concept of basically in the old days you'd provision machines and buy a lot of access. Another thing that's very important, right, is if in 2020, right, 2022, you bought these machines, right, okay? Now, and then like in 2021, 2023, you buy these. You still got these old machines, haven't you? Now you know that over the space of a few years, machines start becoming deprecated. Their CPU, their
Shared resources in AWS.
Right.
Those resources will be shared in AWS, like a separate powerful server, all those skills, rather than like stuck with CPU that was bought in like 2016.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So what's going to happen is, if you were buying the old school model was you're buying your own computers, right, and you were stuck with that machine, you know what I mean? So you couldn't improve it, you couldn't add more memory to it. You could add more memory to it, right, but you were pretty much stuck with that CPU. You could maybe the IOPS, maybe. But then the day, basically, in the old days, you would buy machines and they couldn't, they would be deprecated and they would very quickly you'd lose money on them, right? And then with AWS, you can basically turn a machine off, right? Let's say, for example, you're running a machine that's got, it's designed to, run 1,000 concurrent users, right? But you want to then run 2,000 concurrent users. You can very easily, I think you turn the machine off and then change its instance type, and that's all it is. You can do that overnight, or you can do that instantaneously. So that's another thing that people go to AWS, Anyway, you kind of asked me what role AWS as a consultant. Yeah, I mean basically same job. You're a consultant. You need all your stuff. You get paid. You're under a magnifying glass. You know what I mean? But hopefully you get paid more. You know what I mean? Say that?
Yeah, you have also the way in the Monolith model where you're basically taking elements out and working on them individually before putting them back in. You have a lot of overlap with people who are implementing like big data or like data analytics on applications that already exist. So if I came to you with an application, I don't have a tracking system on people who are purchasing a certain product, so I can monitor when they buy a product at what time. So like if Amazon was going to do it, they can be like, okay, I've got data analytics for certain periods of time, let's say Christmas, so that way I can predict a high level of purchasing at certain times.
Yeah.
And that way that machine learning module can be split okay next year. At a certain point, we think a lot of people are going to jump on Amazon and buy a ton of stuff, just based off previous history. You get a lot of clients that come and go on with data analytics.
Well, that's not my field. I'm not really in that area, right?
Oh, right.
I'm actually more software modernization. You're talking about big data and analytics stuff. That's a different field. But clearly, that you would use machine learning and you would use things like artificial intelligence and
Amazon give you these, don't they? They've got a whole section on analytics and machine learning and stuff. Is that there?
Yeah, they got all that as well. But the thing is, they've got like
You still have to write the code for it.
Yeah.
It's not hard to-
I mean, at the end of the day, basically what it is blogs out there. There's lots of website information. When I was coming up, there wasn't any that was readily available, but there's so much information out there that you can find out. And research that. The world's your oyster. You just got YouTube. You can find that stuff out. What was your education like? That's why you asked me that. Yeah.
It's
What was my education? Yes, sir.
Uni like for you?
Sorry?
What was like uni like for you, and like what kind of stuff were you learning?
Yeah, so basically what happened was I did aeronautical engineering, right, and well, the thing is, right, they don't make planes in Scotland. You know what I mean?
You maintain them, I think that's different.
Yeah, but the fact about it is, if my brothers, both my brothers did aeronautical engineering, right, and one of them worked on the F-16 and he worked on the B-1 bomber as well, and stuff like that, But to make a plane, an aircraft, it maybe takes about 15 to 20 years from concept to implementation. You know what I mean? And it sounds like a very state-of-the-art industry, but it's actually a very old industry. You know what I mean? So basically, when I started coming out and I come looking at jobs, right, there was nothing there. It was a Prestwick. They only made one plane at the time. I can't remember what it's called, right? But yeah, there was no jobs. You know what I mean? And what I found when I was doing my degree in aeronautical engineering was the stuff that I liked to do the most was around computers. And as I found myself most comfortable in that. And the other thing is, when I graduated, right, there was no jobs, there was nothing in the market. I graduated in '92, right, which is the worst year to graduate. It's a long time for you guys, but it was not a good time to graduate. It's not like now, the market's really fantastic. But when I graduated, there was nothing going right. It was really tough. And a lot of the people, what they had at the time in Strathclyde Uni was what's called a conversion course. So if you had a math or a science degree, like I had, you could, within 1 year, you could do a master's in that. You could get a master's in IT. You know what I mean? It wasn't a very course. I think that was the first time they did it. It wasn't a very good course, but at the end of the day, basically, it got me into IT. And then after that, it took a while, but then eventually, I think the early '90s was a really tough time for jobs, wasn't it? But anyway, so I ended up getting a job down in England, and then I was very lucky. You want to find a company that is going to educate you, invest in you. You know what I mean? A company that's willing to. So that's one of the things that you apply for jobs and go for interviews. You want to get a sense of how much are they going to invest in you, because you guys starting out, and here's my opinion. This is what I think. Right, is you guys are going to be like racehorses. You're going to be like greyhounds coming out there, and you guys, when you come out, you graduate, you'll be like a racehorse. You'll be like a greyhound. Hopefully, and you'll be ready to go. You really want to hit that ground running, right? And the worst thing that I've ever seen, right, is people that are really good, really excited, really sharp, really want to get things going, join a company, and the company does not properly bring them up to speed, does not nurture them, and they start to stagnate. And the worst thing that could happen to anybody is in their first job, while they're all prepped and ready to go coming out of uni, is ending up in a job where they are not valued, they are not nurtured, they are not educated, they are not brought forward. Because what's going to happen is, that is the worst time that can happen to you, because what's going to happen is, in my opinion, the first few years of your career are the most important, because that will set the stage for your future in terms of your work attitude. You know what I mean? Because what's going to happen is, if you find a company that is going to basically educate you and really push you, because what's going to happen if you're young, when you're young, right, in your 20s and 30s, you really want to push yourself, you know what I mean, but not burn out. There's a difference between burning out and really growing as a person. Because what happens is, you want to get to a point where you load up on all your skills, you learn how to educate yourself, you learn how to improve yourself, and then what you learn basically do is you'll get into that mode of operation that makes you always want to be aggressive and not only aggressive, but really push yourself hard to be the best you can be, right? But it doesn't always have to be that way, right? Because what's going to happen is, it's a while away if you guys, eventually you can start to slow down. Once you get to that point where you want to get to, all right, because you need to have a kind of a game plan, right? Okay, in the next 5 years I want to be here, the next 10 years I want to be here. You know what I mean? You should have a game plan. You know what I mean? Like for example, is there a favorite company that you guys like? That you really want to work for McLaren, you really want to work for.
A specific industry you want to work in.
Yeah, you got to find out what is in that industry, And another thing that's very important, in my opinion, is you should steer your career. Your company shouldn't steer your career. If you know what I mean by that. This is very important, right? Is a company. If you go join a company, right, and you've got very clear goals in mind that you want to do with it, you want to achieve certain things, then you should be very laser focused on achieving those. You know what I mean? You can't always, when you join a company, you want to be going in the general direction of that goal. You'll have to kind of deviate a little bit, because you have to be flexible. The company's paying you money, right, to be there. But you want to kind of basically go in that general direction. If you don't feel like you're going in the general direction that you want to go because you want to go into like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the company's taking you down, database maintenance, you know what I mean, or just doing something that you don't see a future in, then what's going to happen is your career can kind of stagnate. It takes a little while to get it back on course again. You know what I mean? So always be mindful of the fact that you want to make sure that you're empowering yourself. So you should steer your career, and you should basically make sure that you control it. You know what I mean? Because companies can control your career, and you can stagnate. I've seen a lot of guys that can just stagnate, and then they kind of start to falter, and just, it's not easy. But at the end of the day, basically, IT is aggressive. You've got to keep learning new stuff and keep pushing yourself, and you can really rolls your oyster.
It's one of these. It is one of these disciplines, IT, where some subjects. Take joinery, for example. I'm picking joinery because I know your background is. Say joinery, you know how to saw some wood, you know how to put things together. That's it. You don't have to learn any more than that. You learn a skill and you apply it, and you can keep doing that for years and years and years. With IT, you've got to be on top of it. You've got to be learning constantly.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not interested in increasing your salary, or eventually being out of work, then you can let yourself stagnate.
Yeah.
But if you really want to, if you're smart, you're savvy, you pick the right stepping stone to cross that river. You know what I mean? You can definitely rolls your oyster. There's nothing stopping you. You know what I mean?
See, when it comes to learning, because when it comes to certain concepts, obviously trying to find material yourself and learn about yourself.
Yeah.
Whether it's with paid courses or free courses. See the gap between finding material online for free and practically using it in an application. How big do you think that is?
It's not much. I mean, I'll give you an example, right? You guys have heard of Udemy or Cloud?
Yeah.
So Udemy is fantastic, right? I mean, I paid $10, I'm getting a really good course. You know what I mean? I mean, it's fantastic. $10, like you're getting sorry?
Some of them are free. I was speaking to you earlier. There's a site called freeudemy.com.
Yeah.
And you can go in there and just filter computer science.
Yeah.
And you get like a bunch of free just for that day.
Yeah.
You get pretty good.
There's so much resources out there, But the thing is, are you willing to give up your Netflix subscriptions to go and learn it?
No, you're not going to
So that's the thing. It's time. You've only got so much limited time.
The skill itself, though, like,
How much time you want to invest in yourself?
Yeah.
You have to learn yourself. I mean, nobody's going to teach you. At the end of the day, basically, it's down to you guys. Then, the fact of the matter is, if you guys want to make the big bucks, you guys can do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, right? Another thing I'll tell you, right, is when I, come from Scotland, right, and have a Scottish accent, and working in America, people, Americans, when they hear a British accent, right, an English accent or a Scottish accent, they think you're smarter than you actually are.
It's all good,
You know what I mean?
Mum forgot that when you went to America.
Yeah. So the fact is,
the pure Glaswegian accent.
But the fact of, so at the end of the day, basically, if you learn up your skills, you study hard, get this, if you can go anywhere you want. You know what I mean? I mean, the fact of it is, you have an English, you can speak English, right? You come, that has a lot of credence. You know what I mean? Wherever you go, you know what I mean? That's, a lot of people stay in Scotland. That's fine, But it depends on what you want to do with your life, but the world's an oyster, right? If you apply yourselves, you know, skill yourself up. Udemy is like £10 or $10, whatever it is for a good course. And then basically self-educate, you know, get yourself a decent computer or laptop and figure out a game plan, 1 year game plan, 5 year game plan, whatever it is. And basically, it doesn't have to be fixed, but there has to be something, you know, a man's reach should exceed his grasp. You heard that term, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So always be reaching for the skies, you know, because you want to basically push yourself, you know, because if, you know, that's what you want, you know what I mean? And you work hard. If you put your hard work into the first 5, 10, 15 years, then you can start to kind of slow down a bit. You know, I don't work hard really anymore. You know what I mean? Because basically, I'm coming in with, I've already learned a lot of stuff, you know, and I know I've been doing this a long time. You know what I mean? So I know exactly. I know how to. I don't have to spread myself out. I know exactly what I'm offering to the company. So, for example, if I talk to a customer, I'm bringing a specific skill set. You know, as you guys starting out, you're going to be trying a lot of different things. You know what I mean? And then figuring out, okay, this is stuff I enjoy doing, and then start just focusing on that. But starting out, you know, just do research, figure out what you know. Where do you see cloud services going in the near future? The cloud services is the future, right? You know what I mean? I'll give you an example. I think this is what they say is about 5%, less than 10%, but like 5 to 6% of all cloud computing. I mean, all IT, everything that is running on computers right now, only 5 or 6% of that is running in the cloud. All right. Okay. Now, 7 years ago, customers would come to us, maybe we were looking at, you know, maybe looking at the cloud. If people come to you, right, if people come to you and say the cloud isn't safe, you're better off keeping it in your own cloud. I don't know if you hear that. Do you ever hear that?
I heard that a few times.
Yeah, so if somebody says to you, right, I mean, I don't know whether you guys want the cloud or not. If somebody says to me, right, oh, we're not really sure in the cloud, but we're not sure if it's safe, right, then just blank that person out because they have no clue what they're talking about. You know what I mean? If companies like Capital One and multi-billion-dollar companies who've done the research, right, and figured out, you know, these people spend millions of dollars trying to figure out where is the best place to live, and they've already done the research, figured out, okay, you know, AWS or Azure or whatever is where we want to go, then they know what they're talking about, you know. But so anyway, yeah, the cloud services is the future, right? I mean, basically the thing is you get certified in AWS or wherever it is, that'll bolster your resume and your CV. You know what I mean? I don't know when you guys are going to start applying for jobs, but the fact of the matter is like if you can do placements, if you can do, you know, here and there, you know. Do you guys do placements and stuff? Yeah.
If you have any of those.
Just recently started back because of COVID.
Oh yeah, that's
I
right.
know
Yeah.
there's a few starting back this, but
Yeah, but I mean, even then, some companies, I'm not sure how it works here, but I mean, if some companies might just say, oh, we have you to work remote, this is your task, you know what I mean, we'll give you access to our GitHub.
Really just learning the stuff and building your own sort of small products, you know, that would demonstrate.
Yeah, yeah.
As well.
Yeah, I mean, build a wee thing on your own, you know, go just, you know, in AWS you can get a free account for a year. Yeah, so just sign up. If you've got an Amazon account, you can easily open up an AWS account. And if you stay within, it's called the free tier, so you can use a certain amount, you can use a whole bunch of services, as long as you stay within that free tier, and you can get a billing for it, so you can know if you're going to be spending any money. It'll give you a warning, you know.
what you were recommending the project to get started on working on the base languages and frameworks, what would you recommend the most for a first project?
I don't really know. I mean, I don't really want to tell you what to do because I don't want to limit your, you know, your. I would basically.
If you could tell yourself what would you start if you go back
On AWS, on the cloud.
Or anything you mean? Well, first of all, there's what you want to find online is a tutorial, right? That has a bunch of parts in it that takes you through. Like Udemy is fantastic, right? Udemy has got some really good examples where it'll take you through, like, okay, building a website along with a database and everything, beginning to end. You know what I mean? So I would basically, you know, I would use that, you know, to start off. So I'll give an example, right, to show you how old I am, right? So basically, when I was a kid, there was something called the ZX Spectrum, right? ZX82, ZX Spectrum. And when it came out, right, I used to get the mail, I had like 48K, right, memory.
Is this the gaming?
Sorry?
Is this the gaming device? Yeah.
It's this little Spectrum thing, you know, it's like came out. But what happened when I bought it, right, I got it by mail, right, and there was no, you couldn't buy software for it. You just couldn't buy software. It just, you know, and what you'd end up doing was you could get these magazines, and it would have code in them. You know what I mean? I could like go, back in the day, right, you'd go to the store, you could buy a cassette, and then have a game on it, and that's how you basically loaded the game up, you know. But when I started out, there was nothing, so I used to type them out. And by typing the code out, I was learning what it was doing. And you guys, you don't have a problem now, right? But basically what I'm trying to say here is get a Udemy course, follow it through, maybe, and then look at ways to improve it. You know what I mean? Like you can follow that through, then you can look at ways of maybe seeing if something that's missing from it. Because the thing is, you know, you don't want to be spoon-fed stuff. You want to be able to think outside the box, because that's what employees are paying you for. You know what I mean? Employees are paying you to think outside the box, to add value, you know. So what do you think the most growing technology will be within the coming years? I can't really say that. I mean, I know machine learning and artificial intelligence is a big data is a big thing. You know what I mean? But it's hard to predict. It's very, very hard to predict the way things are going, you know. I think it's just a case of you guys have to figure out where are the best sources of information for you. You know what I mean? There's websites, you might want to find there's a particular blogger that you guys like, or there's a website that is pretty good. Now there's a Lead Code. There's a website called Lead Code. Have you guys heard of it?
Prepare for the interviews.
It's got a lot. It's got a lot in the software course as well.
Yeah, I think so. So there's a website called Blind. Have you heard of Blind?
Yeah.
So I can look at Blind, you know, and I've seen the Lead Code. I haven't interviewed him in a long time, you know. I've been working at the same company for 7 years or so. But I tell my daughter that, you know, Lead Code's the place to go, but that's probably more for me. But you know, I've seen articles of people in Blind saying, you know what, I spent 3-4 months.
Blind, I tried to check, I think it's more better in America. Blind's the place you can do a couple of companies.
That's right, yeah.
I tried over here, but it doesn't seem to work as well in the UK. But
No, it's probably not many companies, you know.
I think we have Glassdoor here.
Yeah, Glassdoor, But yeah, I mean, that'll tell you. I mean, Lead Code basically is when before you start interviewing, you know, you want to figure out what level you need to study on, and get speed on that. So, what will you learn? What would you learn at this stage? Me? I'll learn how to manage my retirement fund right now. You know what I mean? That's all I think about these days. You know, but I'm older than you guys. What I would learn at this stage? What would you learn? I would basically. I would learn how to present, I would learn how to come across, know your stuff. If you go for an interview, you need to get a sense of what the person's going to be asking you about, and you talk about it with confidence, like you know it back to front, you know what I mean? So, you know, obviously you're starting out, you know, you kind of had to spread yourself out a little bit more because you've got to chase opportunities, but in terms of what to learn, I mean, obviously, you know, cloud computing is a thing that you want to learn. That's where the big bucks are. You know what I mean?
Confidence, I think that will come out at your interviews if you do this stuff. Just what I'm saying, doing projects, finding something you can build, show them something that you can actually pass on to them.
Yeah, because if you do a project by yourself, and when you know, I was thinking about this for my daughter because she's kind of in the same boat as you guys. Is that when you're first coming out, you know, you can't say that you worked in Bank of Scotland, that you worked here and worked there. So what they'll press you on is what did you do in your own steam, you know? And then if you do like a Udemy exercise, or you do something where you can say, you know what, I did this and I did that, and then I found opportunity to improve, or I found the deficiency, or I found a way to make it better, and I did this, I did that.
It also shows that you're not just relying on your HN certificate or your degree. You know, you're not a student who studies the night before and passes exams. Who does that? You're actually losing that quality. I'll talk about this next.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have students that study the night before, pass exams, and if you keep doing that, some of you are not doing degrees now, I think. So if you keep doing this, what's going to happen at the end of your 3-4 years? You're going to have a diluted version of your education. Whereas if you go home every day and you're coding, and you're on Udemy and you're running these courses and you're building projects and you're constantly kicking that ball in a way, then by the end of your 4 years, you'll have the confidence to show in front of an employer, I know my stuff. That's the only way you're going to have that happen. Maybe a good example. Catering students that come into catering school, they come in once a week, they make one dish, they go home and say, Mummy, I'm a chef now. You're not a chef, you've got to be cooking every day. The footballers are kicking that ball every day. You only see them play the game, but they're actually kicking that ball every day. Guys like Stefan, myself, way back in those days, we were writing code every single day. We were lucky because there was no WhatsApp, there was no YouTube around at that time, there was none of all that. Those distractions were not there. But now you've got all those distractions, you've really got to say, you're Netflix, I don't want you anymore. Friends, I don't want you. I'm not coming to the pub with you guys this weekend. I'm sitting at home and I'm going to learn all this stuff. The more you know, the more projects you've got, the more you can pass on here to someone that's interviewing you. If you go to your interview, let's say tomorrow, and say, right guys, I built 3 Android apps. I've put all my web services in the cloud in Amazon because I learned it all myself. And the code's in GitHub, go and check it. If you say that to an employer, think about what that's going to give them, other than just saying to them, you know what, I went to City of Glasgow College and that's my HNC certificate, give me a job. Who's going to get it? You know, it's the ones that have spent that extra time. If you can spend that extra time, you can get to that point.
No, I mean, if you can basically develop a web app that in the interview you can say, oh, you know what, I've got a web app, let me show you it on the phone, talk to it, that's going to really impress them, you know.
And you'll have the confidence to talk about it, because you can talk about it because you built it. Your hands are dirty doing it. And that's the other thing with YouTube is you can sit there and watch as much as you want, but programming, computer science is not a spectator sport. You can't just keep watching videos all the time. You can't actually do it. I do get students, some students say, oh, I'm losing the code. So no, get your fingers dirty. Get it tapping, you've got to see, oh, I get errors. You've got to see the errors. The more errors you see, the better the programmer you become. Because every error that comes across your way, you learn from it. Guys, this took longer than expected. Most likely because Stefan was such an engaging speaker for us. I think it was very good. This is the only opportunity you're going to have. I spoke to the other second years and some of you said, no, they're all too busy. So I feel privileged that he's actually come and given us this time. You guys, I hope, took a lot from it as well. Thanks for yeah.
Alright, good luck, you guys.
You're finished. You can finish up.
Thanks very much.
No worries, man. Alright, guys.
I'll catch up with you.
Stay.
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 We'll just finish up now.
See if I was to help with this, just say that the draft. You can just go and get that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good mindset, you know.
This guy, Oliver's running JP Morgan.
Nice.
And so successful as me.
The first two classes
Useful.
See, I'll upload this as a draft,
Send it as a draft just now.
and then you can like get it on your computer and
that's
say.
fine. If you don't want to tap the full one.